Hello, welcome to our worship facility webinar, How to Edit Video for Broadcasting and Streaming Your Worship Service, with our guest, Graham Spencer. I'm Gene Lass, editor of Worship Facility. Graham, I know you've been in broadcasting for quite a long time. Tell us how you got to combining broadcasting with worship.
So I started in broadcast television nearly 30 years ago now, and became a researcher for an independent production company here in the UK. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm on the other side of the Atlantic from you guys, although I lived in America for 8 years, so I know America fairly well as well. And then after working for a couple of years in kind of mainstream secular broadcasting and learning my craft, learning my trade as a producer, I joined an organization called Christian Channel Europe, as they were called back then, who were actually the first Christian television station to start here in the UK. And I joined them the day after they started. So I joined them right at the very, very early stages. I was not looking to get into Christian media, Christian broadcasting at all. But it was an opening, it was an opportunity, and I took it. And then from there, I've spent most of the last 25 years working for that organization that then ultimately became Dog TV, who are now a global broadcaster, and really just got involved in all aspects of production, producing, directing, overseeing, editing, all of that kind of stuff. So that's really how I got involved in combining broadcasting with worship, was just through Christian media.
That's a lot. You've been mainly behind the camera, but now you're in front of the camera now and then, and you're thoroughly versed in everything: video, editing, camera work. It's quite the background.
Oh, thank you, Gene. That's very kind of you to say that. And let me just say, I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you today as well. And really hope that we can help people kind of understand a little bit about how this process works as well. And I really thank you and Worship Facility as well for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Probably the unique qualification you have is that you've been involved at the super professional level, where most of our audience, they're at medium or small churches. They might be at the larger churches, and they have a team of volunteers. So your professional skills can really benefit people. I know that you're also very in tune with helping them use the equipment they have on hand. It might not be the alpha class super professional equipment that they have. So you're able to help them use what they have to the best of their ability to make the best broadcast and service that they can have. That's the great value that you bring.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm a great believer. I often get asked the question, what's the best camera that I can use to do something? And my answer is, what's the camera that you've got at the moment? Because that's probably the best one that you can use. I believe that a lot of what we can experience comes from doing and learning as we do as well. So to me, I'm a passionate believer in equipping people and training people and giving them the skills that they need to excel before they get the better equipment. Because if you can do something really good with poor equipment, you can absolutely excel when you get access to better equipment.
That's very true. So why don't we get started and see what information you can present to our audience to help them do what they can do better.
Fantastic. And thank you again for the opportunity. It's a real pleasure to be here as well. So obviously we're looking today at how to edit video for broadcasting and streaming a worship service, very specifically. So we're not looking at editing for any other means, but really around that whole worship service perspective. But before I jump in, we just heard a little bit about kind of my background and who I am, but let me just give you a little bit of why I believe I actually am qualified to speak into this. So I basically, as I said, I live here in the UK. I actually have spent 8 years living over there in the US, so I'm kind of a foot in both camps. So, you know, I love the US, I love the UK, but I live in a country called Scotland, which is on the kind of north of the UK. Unfortunately, it's very cold at the moment, so it's just turning. We get fall probably about 2 months earlier than you guys over there. So it's a bit cold, but it's a beautiful part of the world. And I've been involved in broadcasting for nearly 30 years, for the last 25 years, specifically based in Christian television and Christian media. I've overseen content creation across the world. I specialize in live broadcasting as well. So I've produced live conferences and live events in Australia and Africa and India, the UK, the US, and even South America. The only place, I always joke, the only place I've not done a live broadcast from is Antarctica yet. Maybe that one's in the agenda now that we're kind of getting into that colder part of the world. But so my experience very much is in taking a live event and a live broadcast and turning it into something that works for a viewer in their living room. As I said, I've had a long association with God TV, starting with them the day after they started here in the UK and overseeing their broadcast for most of the last 25 years. I left them in 2020 when my wife and my family relocated back here to the UK. And before I left, I was their chief operating officer. So my responsibility wasn't just production, but it was running all of the kind of the operations departments, editing, creative services, library, scheduling, or as you would call it, scheduling. So anything and everything to do with broadcast, basically. So I've got a good overview of the kind of the entire production process and the entire operations process. I now have a production company, so I'm a producer, a director. I consult with churches and ministries and organizations to help them use media more effectively. And it's a delight to be able to share today with you. I also set up an organization called Media Mentoring a couple of years ago, and the aim of that really is to come alongside churches and people involved in church media to do exactly what we're doing today, to train them and to equip them to be better versed in everything that they do. So that's my heart, that's my passion. Let me say though, I am not an editor. So we're talking a lot about editing today. I am not an editor. I can edit. I actually first started editing back in the days of tape-to-tape editing, but I am not an editor. My passion is to work with editors. I am primarily a producer and director, and I've worked with some amazing editors over the last 25 years. I value that collaboration process. So let's move on, and before we get into the hows, I just want to set the scene a little bit of what I believe we can do with editing. So for me, the most important thing is the aspect of storytelling. How can we create a compelling narrative that will draw in your audience? Through what we do in terms of editing, we have the possibility to engage the viewers on a journey. We can take them on a journey, and that's all around storytelling. I believe that right at the very start of this process, one of the most important things that we need to do is we need to define what our content goals are. We need to identify the key messages that we have to share, the emotions that we want to portray to the viewers, and all of that then plays into how we get to editing the content. But before we look at...
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Gene.
At church, do you think that could be a collaborative effort with the pastor? Because the pastor is going to know what the service is going to be that day. He's going to know the subject. They may have to say, you know, this is going to be a more powerful thing. They might be able to collaborate that with the pastor, possibly the lighting team, and really make a powerful story rather than just, we're going to be filming this and I need a camera there.
Yeah, the more integrated you can get everyone involved in the process, the more understanding they all have of what everyone is looking to achieve, particularly what the pastor's heart is, obviously, for what he's bringing, the message that he's conveying, the emotions that he wants to share, the responses that he wants to draw from the congregation. The more collaboration that you can draw in from all of those things, the greater the ability to then capture that well and convey it to the audience who are not there. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take the story that's happening in the auditorium, in the church, in the sanctuary, whatever your tradition would call the place where you gather, and then convert that into something that works for an audience watching it. They might be watching it on a phone, on a train. They might be watching it in an airport, on a laptop. They might be watching it in the comfort of their living room. But the whole purpose of it is to draw people in and engage them and take them from viewing to participating. That's the whole purpose of what we're trying to do with everything we're trying to create.
Excellent.
So let me just talk about the pros of editing rather than live streaming. So I'm not a great believer that you should live stream. I'm not a great believer that you should post produce. I think every organization, every church needs to find their sweet spot. What I would say, though, is that there are distinct pros and distinct cons for both things. But one of the pros for live stream, so for editing over live streaming, is you can get to control the quality. What I mean by that is you can correct mistakes. You won't have bad camera cuts. You can polish up the kind of presentation that you're producing for your audience. You can make the quality that much higher, and that's particularly relevant if you have lower quality equipment or untrained staff or whatever. You get the chance to really polish up your broadcast before you then put it out to your audience. The other thing you can do is you can tailor the content more specifically towards your online or your viewing audience. You can edit out things like when the pastor talks about what's coming up in the church on Wednesday night that people may not be able to connect with. You can make it more relevant to the people that are watching at home through tailoring the content. And then you can maximize your resources as well. Sometimes with churches, things can be very limited. We operate on limited budgets with limited volunteers and all of those kind of things. And by pre-recording and then editing our content, we can get to maximize some of those resources as well. We can use cameras more effectively maybe than if we are, for example, having to shoot for iMag and also for live broadcasting and stuff as well. So we can maximize our resources. But there are some cons. So let me go for the cons. So the cons are editing takes time. That's the first and foremost thing that you need to understand is when you're editing content, you are having to revisit content. And we'll get into that, how's that all work in a minute. But it will take time and it does consume the resource of time. You will need an editor if you're not going to edit it yourself. So there are resources that you will need to put into this. You don't get, and this is probably the biggest reason that I would say churches wouldn't do this, you don't get that live instant interaction. You don't get that moment of you're saying something and someone's receiving it there and then. Now, with uploading videos to things like YouTube and Facebook, you can still upload it, you can add chat features and all of those kind of things, but it's not ever going to be something that you're going to be receiving as it's happening. These are things that you'll see comments, and you can still moderate those comments. You can even moderate the comments live. You can have someone sitting in their living room on a commenting back on people's what they're saying to you and things as well. So you can do elements of that, but you do miss out on that live interaction. And that's probably one of the reasons I think most people would stay away from this approach, is they love that live interaction. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. And the other thing that you need to work out if you are editing your content is, do you need to put in place some kind of approval process? Now, when you're filming a church service on a Sunday and you're streaming it, it goes out and it's done. You walk away and that's it. It's kind of like, hands off, all done. But if you're then editing that afterwards, and let's say you're taking maybe an hour and a half church service and you're trying to edit that down to make it more compatible for an online audience, you may be trimming the timing of that down to, say, an hour. You may need to edit the sermon down from, say, a 40-minute sermon to a 30-minute sermon. Well, if you're doing that, do you then need to resubmit that to the pastor for approval? And some of those things need to be borne in mind as well. What's the approval process that you might need to put in place? But there is definitely the value in post-producing content in terms of making it so that it's relevant to the people at home. But you do lose certain things, and you do have to consider other factors.
I think you're kind of going, there's great points. You're basically having two audiences, because with the live stream, we've been through the pandemic, and they always have television church for people who can't get out. That's for people who might want to be there, but they can't, but they can feel like they're part because it's live. With the production value, where you're doing post-production and putting out a different package later with all the ums and ahs and foibles, of course there's foibles taken out of there, you can cut it up any way you want, and that's going to be possibly on YouTube. It might be shared on social media. There's lots of people who say that that's going to help you reach your new audience, particularly with Gen Z. The younger people, they want to have a video they can share with somebody, and that might be a holiday celebration. That might be your Christmas service, where you want that to look pristine, and to have it shared among young people who are going to say, wow, look at what they did. And they want to look at the next one, and then maybe they'll watch it live, and then maybe they'll come in. But still, it's something that'll draw on newer people that might not be happening right now. I think that's a great way of looking at it.
No, totally, which then leads me on to what about doing both?
There you go.
And you're exactly right. There is a real argument, I believe, that we can make for doing both. So, as I said earlier, I am not opposed to live streaming. I'm not opposed to pre-recording and post-producing the content as well. In fact, if you have the resources, I would really suggest that this is something that a lot of churches need to strongly consider. Yep. Not only live streaming, but then taking that live stream and post-producing it. Why should you do that? Well, you get greater longevity out of your content. So you can, exactly as you said, you can fix those foibles, the things that went wrong, or you can bring more enhancement into what you're doing and what you're producing. You can maybe increase the kind of the creativity around some of the video work. All of those kind of things can be really, really helpful, particularly if you are looking to reach that audience that maybe don't know you as well, or are a little bit less reticent about tuning into who you are. Quality matters with people, and particularly people that don't know who you are and maybe are not as, for want of a better word, forgiving of the quality. If you post-produce your material, you can enhance that quality, and then you can give them a greater experience, and you can give them the ability to stay with things. You can add other things like graphics. You can add more touch points for them. You can add more illustrations. You could even potentially add some B-roll over what the pastor's saying to illustrate some of the points and things as well. So you could get a lot more creative with things. And then you can also, you can take out those things that are not relevant to your online audience. We mentioned about announcements and some of those things, but there are other things that happen in a church service as well that sometimes are not relevant as well. So I think, there's a huge amount that we can do. And I would also suggest that we look at repurposing our content. So not only are we editing it down and putting it out there as a package thing, but we can then look at, okay, what else can I get out of this content? You can look at, for example, editing the sermon out as just a standalone piece that then goes out. So if you don't want to click on and watch through the worship, but you just want to get the sermon, I could access that. You could even look at worship songs. If you have some great moments, I call them worship moments, that happen in worship, you can take some of those elements and turn them into other video pieces. And then you can create social media posts. There are some amazing opportunities out there with short form video at the moment to take some of your long form material and edit it down and produce it and put it out there consistently throughout the week, throughout the month. So you get a lot more bang for your buck, for want of a better word, when it comes to the content. And all of that can also point back to that original piece of content. So if people watch a worship moment, you can put a link back to, hey, if you want to watch the full service, it's back here. So you're cross promoting as well. So there's a lot of things that you can do through that. I believe that repurposing content is an extremely valuable thing for a lot of churches. So let's move on. How should you approach editing? Well, the first thing that you need to approach editing with is when you're capturing the material. If you capture the material right, you will be able to edit better. So my recommendations, and this is not going to be possible for every church. Every church is going to be different. But these are the things that I would suggest if you're serious about wanting to repurpose content for your post-production and you're not just live streaming, then these are some of the things that you need to start considering. Can you do this? Or what do you need to add in terms of your resources to be able to make this happen? So the first thing that I always say is you need what I call a clean line cut. What do I mean by clean? Well, that means without any song lyrics on it, without any lower thirds on it, without any PowerPoint slides on it, all of those kind of things, because stuff like that makes it much harder to edit when it comes to it. If you have a clean version of everything, you can edit that down and then you can re-add those things in afterwards. So the first thing is a clean version of everything. The next thing, and again, this might not be possible for a lot of churches, is a multi-track of your audio, particularly the worship. The reason for that is you can then go back in and you can remix the levels. You can change things. You can, if an instrument didn't feature in the mix, you can add it back in. All of those kind of things. Again, you're trying to enhance the quality of the viewing experience for the person at home, and being able to post-produce your audio is going to be a massive thing of that. But in order to do that, you need to have a multi-track recording of that audio. You also need all of the graphics pieces. You need to work out what graphics you need. Things like I call them name supers or lower thirds for the people that are going to be featured in the service. You need to think about those. PowerPoint slides, if the pastor is looking at PowerPoint slides, video playbacks, you might need that, song words, all of those kind of things. You need to have all of that captured and ready to go when it comes to the editing. And then the other thing that I always recommend is, if possible, record ISO records of some of your camera feeds. ISO record is basically, it's an individual feed of that camera. So you would record from the start of the service to the end of the service, that one camera completely. Whatever it's doing, you have the ISO record of that. Because if you have that, you then have the ability to cut to that shot when you didn't cut to it during the live stream. That's particularly helpful when it comes to the editing process. So when you get to editing your pastor's sermon, and on your line cut, he's preaching here, and then you've taken out, I don't know, an in joke or a reference that he made to something that specifically dates the service to that Sunday that you don't want in. But the next shot that you've got of him after you've made the cut is him on the same, the same camera, the same position. So you're cutting from one camera to the same camera. If you have ISO records, it enables you to take the video and overlay that over that cut and make it seamless so that the person at home doesn't even know you've edited it. So that's what you're trying to do, is basically, so that's the purpose of ISO records. And the more ISO records, the more options that you have when it comes to the video editing. Now, sorry, Gene, do you have a question there?
No, I said brilliant. I'm cheering you on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So there's lots of software that you can use when it comes to editing. I've put 4 of them on this PowerPoint slide, which is basically Avid, Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, and DaVinci Resolve. So those are, I would say, the 4 industry standard editing software. There are others out there as well. I mean, some people use iMovie, there's CapCut, there's plenty of others out there, but these are the ones that if you want to get serious about editing, you really need to think through some of these. Now, they all have their pros and cons. So as I said, I'm not an editor. I've worked with editors that have worked on Avid. I've worked with editors that have worked on Final Cut. In fact, I've worked with editors that have worked on all of these different pieces of software, and every editor swears by the software that he uses. But you should find the one that's best for you. I would say the one benefit of DaVinci Resolve over all of the others, it's a free piece of software. It's made by Blackmagic, who, as we know, are taking over the world. But it's actually a free piece of software, but it's probably the more complicated one out of all 4 of them to actually use. It's not as intuitive, and that probably is because they don't have to make it as intuitive because it's free. But a lot of people will use these. And my suggestion is use all of them. Most of them have free trials, and then figure out the one that is most intuitive for you. All of them have a multi-camera editing feature, and that can be super helpful when it comes to editing a live service. What that means is the ISO recordings that I was talking about earlier, you can put all of that into a multi-camera view, and all the way through the timeline, you'll see what each of those cameras are, which enables you to select the best shot at every moment during the entire piece. It's incredibly helpful when it comes to editing. So I would strongly suggest check out those pieces of software and see which one works for you. Okay, so let's move on now to the how of editing. The first thing, I think, as a director, I'm talking specifically now to those of you that work as directors or producers for your church. I'm not talking to the editor. I'll come to you in a minute. But as a director or a producer that's going to work collaboratively with an editor, and I'm a great believer of collaboration. I believe there's a reason that very few Hollywood directors edit their own films. They almost all have an editor that they work with, and often they'll work with the same editor again and again and again and again, because they build up that sense of collaboration. One of the reasons for that is a second pair of eyes on something is always helpful. It can enable you to see things through a way that you didn't see it before, particularly if you filmed it and you've directed it and then you're taking it in afterwards. It's your baby in one sense. So having someone else that will question some of your decisions can be really, really helpful. So collaboration is a really important part of the process. The other thing as well is you need to remember it's about telling a story. We spoke about that at the start of the process. This is all about how we tell a story visually and also through the edits that we make. It's all around trying to tell a story, because it's story that ultimately will engage your viewers. So what do you need to do to be prepared? Well, you need to know the story that you're going to tell. When you go into that edit suite, you should already have a very clear understanding of what it is you want to walk away from. You also, I strongly suggest that you've rewatched the material that you've shot and you've made some notes around it. You've already got an idea of the things that didn't work and the things did work. You're not going in there to watch it again, you're brand new, but you've actually done a little bit of homework, so you're prepared on that. The other thing, and I mentioned the approval process earlier, you need to be really clear if there is an approval process that needs to be gone through and what that approval process is, because you need to factor in time to make that approval process happen. Now, there's some great options out there for approval. There's a system called Frame.io, which I'm not sure whether it's paid. I'm not sure whether it's free. I've only ever used it from the user end, not the kind of the uploading end. But it's a fantastic little piece of software, but whereby you can upload a video to it, send a link to people, they can then look at it and they can go in and make notes on it as well. So they can actually, on the timeline, they can say, at this point, I don't like that, or at this point, I don't like that as well. It's a fabulous piece of software for approval. It saves you having to just send a video file and then someone making manual notes, typing it all up. It just saves an awful lot of time. So Frame.io, check that one out. But be clear on what that approval process is. And then the other thing that you need to really be clear on are what's the deliverables. So, for example, if you're repurposing content and you're putting it out on things like Instagram Reels and things like that, you have to produce things at different aspect ratios than you do if you're putting it out on YouTube as a standard broadcast. YouTube Shorts have different aspect ratios. So you need to understand where you're going to put all of the pieces of content and know what the individual deliverables are, so that you are very clear when you come to the end of the process what then needs to happen and what the editor needs to do to make sure that everything gets delivered correctly and in the right way. So that's my recommendations for how you as a director need to prepare. How should an editor prepare? Okay, so an editor first and foremost needs to get organized. So they need to make sure that all of the material that they're going to use is available in their edit system. They need to ideally have sorted all of those pieces of edited content into what I call bins. All of the pieces of software that I referred to earlier have bins that you can place things in. So worship could go into one bin. Preaching can go into another bin. Graphics can go into another bin, all of those kind of things, so that it's organized. So when the director walks through the door, you're not trying to think, oh, now where did I put that? You're really clear on where everything is. I also recommend, as an editor, you watch through as much of the content you possibly can before you start editing. Again, get to know the material, get to know what's there, what worked, what doesn't work. All of that kind of thing can be incredibly helpful and save an awful lot of time in your edit suite. The other thing is, if your final piece is going to need graphics and audio tracks and all of those kind of things, make sure all of that material is ready and again in the bins before you start editing. You also need to set up your timeline in the way that you want it. And that's not something that the director should be telling you. That's something you dictate. So you need to have it set up the way you work. If you work across 3 monitors, make sure that the monitors are set up. All of these things that are going to make your work environment easily for the director to function well with you. The other thing that is really important from a director's perspective is that I feel welcomed in the edit suite, that there's a basic things. Is there a chair that I can sit on when I come in? Or am I going to have to go and find a chair? All of those kind of things. Is there coffee on the go? I live on coffee. So, those kind of things, they're actually important, and they make the process work better. And I also suggest, if possible, try and research who it is that you're working with, what they've done, look at some of their other material that they've maybe produced in the past. You get a feel for their style and things as well. That can be incredibly helpful. Now, I realize most churches, you're probably going to be working with the same people week in, week out, week in, week out. So maybe this isn't relevant to everyone, but there may be churches that you have a team of volunteers and you don't quite know who's going to be editing with you that week, or the editor doesn't quite know who's going to be walking in as the director that week as well. So all of these things can be incredibly helpful as well. Okay, so we're ready. We're sat in the edit. So Gene, let me just check in with you. How are we doing at the moment? Is this working for you? Am I going too fast, too slow? Where are we at?
This is great. Yeah, this is great. Okay. And I like the mention of coffee. Coffee makes the world go round.
It certainly does. Coffee is the most important thing in an edit suite. Forget anything that anyone else will ever tell you. Okay, so the editing process. How do we edit? Well, start with the audio. That's the most important thing. The audio is the thing that you need to start with, because ultimately that's what the story is. The audio comes from, the story comes from the audio. So if you start with the audio and you get that bit right, so you're listening for the things you need to edit out. You're listening for the bloopers. You're listening for the stumbles. You're listening for the bunny trails that actually are irrelevant to the audience at home, and you're editing those out. You're going to end up at the end of that process with probably a lot of jump cuts on your timeline, but that's okay. You've got the audio down, so get the audio down first. Then you move on to the visuals, and that's where you use the multi-camera features, and you're piecing in whether it's graphics, excuse me, or whether it's the other camera pieces or PowerPoint slides. Now, PowerPoint slides can be a great option for editing as well. Full screen PowerPoint, when someone needs to be, when you've made that audio cut and you don't have a camera that you can go to, if they're referring to something and you've got a full screen PowerPoint at that piece, fantastic way of avoiding jump cuts. All of those kind of things. So that's where you then move on to the visuals. So you get the visuals right at that point. Then you look at, okay, put yourself into the perspective of the audience. Am I telling this story that I would want to see as a viewer? Have I missed certain things? So, for example, again, depending on your tradition, maybe you've got a pastor who loves call and response kind of thing in your church. He loves the amens and the preach it, pastor, or whatever that is. Look at it from the viewer. So if you're editing and the pastor's saying, "Give me an amen," and everyone shouts amen, do you cut to the audience at that point? Because that's, as a viewer, what I want to see. I want to see people responding. So that's where it comes to that visual storytelling. You're looking to produce a story that the viewer at home wants to see. That's the one thing that I would encourage you. Always try and put yourself in the perspective of the viewer at home. Okay? At that point, once you've got all of that done, you can then consider the duration. Now, for most of us, we don't have to worry about producing video to any set duration. But if your video is going, maybe you're on a local TV station, for example, and you're repurposing content into a 28-minute, 30 television broadcast, well, you've got to look at the time. And that's at that point is where you then look at the time. You need to look at, okay, do I need to snip out 2 minutes here or a minute there or whatever? And what does that look like? But if you are doing that, you have to be careful to what I call preserve the integrity of the message. So you shouldn't edit something out that destroys the integrity of what's being said. And also, one thing that is really easy to do, if you get to, say you're editing a 40-minute sermon and you're editing it into a 25-minute TV broadcast or whatever, well, that's 15 minutes that you have to take out of that, which, let's face it, most pastors can lose 15 minutes of their sermon, no problem. But what I would say is, if you edit something in, so there's a point that the pastor makes that's actually irrelevant. It has no real benefit for the overall flow of the sermon and you edited it out, but then you get later in the piece that you're editing and he refers back to it, remember you've edited that out, because otherwise it will make no sense for the person who's watching it. So you may either need to put it back in again, or you have to edit out the reference to it as well. So there's a bit of a process that you have to go through here, but that's what I call about kind of protecting the integrity of the message. So make sure that you do that. So those are the kind of the editing process. So hopefully by the end of that process, you then have a finished product. That's where you then need to move on to the review and approval process. Now, this will depend on your individual circumstances, the approval process I mentioned about Frame.io and things as well. But I always suggest before you send it anywhere, you watch it again in its entirety. And you don't interrupt that watching, even if you see things during that viewing that you know are wrong or you know you're fixing, you're making notes. And the editor's making his notes. So you're both watching it and you're both making notes. You don't interrupt it, though, because you want an idea of how it flows. And the more you stop and start it, you won't get an understanding of the flow of the piece. So instead of stopping it and trying to fix something, make a note of it and go back to it afterwards. So what you do is, once you've finished watching it, you compare your notes and you listen to each other and you ask, okay, what worked, what didn't work? And then you have, basically from that, you draw up a short list of the changes that you need to make. And then you go in and you make those final changes. It's at that point that you then need to send it off for approval. And then you might have to wait. You might have to wait for 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever. And you need to understand at the start of this whole process what that is going to take. And you obviously need to build that into your timescales when it comes to the editing. But I always recommend that you allow people the time to watch it and give you good feedback. You need good feedback. It's only after that that you would then color grade, if you color grade your material, and you put the audio, the post-produced audio, back on as well. The reason you don't do it before you send it off to approval is because if there are any other changes that you've got to make, all of the time you just spent doing the audio post and the color grading will be irrelevant. So do that at the last stage of the process. Get the approval and then make the tweaks that you make to make it kind of sparkle, whether it's audio, color grading, or whatever. And then you need to give it to the editor and allow him the time that he needs to do all of the repurposing, reversioning. I mentioned about Instagram Reels and 16:9s and 9:16 formats and all of those kind of things. The editor needs to take time to be able to do that. So that's the process. And then at the end of that, you can walk away and you can say, I'm done. So there you go. That's my very brief talk through from a director's perspective, the editing process. I would just say, in conclusion, collaborative storytelling makes a massive, massive difference. Creative collaboration between the director and producer will produce better content than one of you will do by yourselves. Okay. And the other thing is, remember to keep storytelling at the very heart of your content generation. If you keep to that as a framework, you won't go far wrong. Gene, can I just mention a couple of quick resources? Yes. Is that okay?
Please do.
So wonderful. So if this has been helpful to you today, and I hope it has, it's been a very quick run through. I do appreciate that. But I wrote an ebook a while ago now. It's free to download. It's called Let's Make It Better, My Top 5 Tips to Improve Your Media Ministry. It's got chapters in there about lighting, audio, camera work, all of these kind of things. I think you'll find it really helpful. It's a free ebook. There's a QR code on the screen there. You can grab that and it will be emailed to you. So just go on, put your name in, put your email address in, and we'll send that over to you. I get some great feedback from it all the time, so I know it's helpful, but it's aimed at people that really want to take their media ministry to that next level. And also, I would say, if you want to connect with me as well, there's another QR code on the screen. I believe in QR codes. That takes you to an online business card, which has got all of my website information, LinkedIn information, Facebook, Instagram, all of those kind of things as well that you can connect with me. It's also got a link on there for setting up a free phone call if that would be helpful for anyone as well. So I love talking to people, as you can probably tell. I love talking. And you know, but I want to, my heart and passion really is to serve the local church, to improve what we're doing, because I believe this is the greatest time for those of us involved in media in local churches to use media to reach people effectively. So that's why I'm thrilled to be partnering with you at Worship Facility, because I know that's your heart as well. So Gene, this has been an absolute joy to be with you today.
Yeah.
So I hope that's been helpful. I don't know whether you've got any questions that you want to dive into or any clarifications. I realize it's been a bit of a fly through, so but let me know.
That was a great job, Graham. It was fantastic. And having extra resources for people is a great thing, where they can just scan the QR code and get to whatever else they need. As always, if anyone has any questions aside from that, you can email me at glast@worshipfacility.com. I can answer them for you, or I can forward them to Graham. If you have a problem getting the QR code or anything else, I can get you in touch with him, and he has anything you'd ever want to know about editing and video and the process of how to make that happen at your church. Thank you, Graham, and thank you for watching today.